Hey everybody, today I'd like to talk about choosing colors for your palette. The first thing that I feel like I should probably acknowledge is that I'm not a professional painter. In terms of skill level, if I was going to rate myself, I think that I'm probably better than most amateurs just because I've had more training than most amateurs, but I'm not as good as most professionals. So I guess you should think about that, be aware of that. But I'm guessing that if you're watching this video, you're probably not a professional either, because I would guess that most professionals already have kind of their system in place. But I'm hoping that regardless of your skill level, whether you're just a beginner or whether you're a seasoned painter that is actually more skilled than I am, I'm hoping that you'll be able to still get something out of this video once you hear why I've chosen some of these colors and kind of hear about my methodology and so on. I'm hoping that you'll be able to still find something useful, maybe incorporate some of these things into your own palette and help you to make some of these color choices for yourself. Okay, so first off, we have titanium white. Over here we have cadmium yellow light. This is yellow ochre. This is burnt sienna. This color here is quinacridone rose. This is Prussian blue. And then here I've taken the primary colors. I've taken Prussian blue, the quinacridone rose, and the cadmium yellow light, and I've mixed those all together to create this black mixture right here. Now, to explain some of these color choices, I've tried pretty hard to figure out a good color combination as far as I wanted to use a limited palette. For a long time I wanted to use just the three primary colors. So I tried several different options. I tried, the most successful one seemed to be ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, and then some yellow, usually cadmium yellow light. And that worked pretty well. I was a little bit concerned about the permanence of alizarin crimson. I guess you can get more permanent versions of it, but that was one of the reasons why I kind of went away from that. And I think that one works okay. You can get pretty dark colors. You can also get some pretty good browns and so on. But I just kept trying to experiment and find good combinations. One of the ones that I actually tried for a while is I was trying to find a good yellow, magenta, cyan palette. I thought that might work pretty well. And I tried lots of different combinations, but the problem I ran into is that oftentimes they were middle value, and so mixing them together, I could never get it to be dark enough. And I tried various reds, like cadmium red light. I kept trying cadmium red light because it just seemed like that was about the right value. It looked like the red that you often find in color charts and so on. And actually, I even had an art teacher who suggested that we use that. But I found that I didn't get good results with that at all. A lot of times the colors are pretty washed out, and I just couldn't get it dark enough. I really like to have a full range of value. I know that the Impressionists said you shouldn't use black. And it's true that you don't have black in the shadows. A lot of times beginners make the shadows much too dark. That was true of me as well. And I don't know why we do that, but I guess we just think, well, it's in shadow, so just make it really, really dark and make it black. And, maybe that's why they thought that you shouldn't use black, but you can have lighter shadows. Most shadows are going to be kind of more of a gray, a kind of a colorful gray, purple, kind of a really subdued purple maybe. So you can use black without necessarily having extremely dark shadows. And I think that having black is actually very helpful, and having grays and so on. I feel like a lot of the Impressionist work is actually really washed out. It's very high key, and I don't really like that. I actually like more of the Rembrandt look a little bit more. It just seems more dramatic when you have more of a value range. So maybe that's just a personal preference, but I like being able to get really dark. And so that's one of the good things about Prussian blue here. As you can see, it's very, very dark, and this is really what makes it so that you can get all the way to black. I also like having a little bit darker red. That's what the quinacridone rose does. It's actually a violet pigment. It's PV19, I believe. So it's nice because if you mix it with a little bit of yellow, you can get cadmium red light very, very easily. But it seems like it's a lot harder to go from cadmium red light to more of a purple. So, this makes a nice purple. It's not extremely intense, but it's probably as intense as you'll ever need. But you can also easily get it to more of an orangey red if you want to. So I really like these primaries. One of the things that you'll notice right here, I've gone ahead and shown what it looks like, the Prussian blue when it's lighter. And, one of the things that I noticed as I started using the palette is I actually kind of stumbled on to my cyan, magenta, yellow palette. As you can see, it's so dark that you wouldn't really know that it's cyan. But as it gets lighter, it's pretty close to cyan. Maybe it's not exact, but it's pretty close. And the quinacridone rose is actually pretty close to magenta as well, especially when you mix it with white and make it a little bit lighter. But it's nice that it comes in these darker forms, because then that helps you to be able to get your full range of values as well as colors. So if you haven't used these colors, you might give them a try. I really like it a lot. One thing to be aware of is that quinacridone red is different than quinacridone rose. So I find that I have better luck with quinacridone rose because it's a violent pigment. It's a violet pigment. So you want that violet pigment. You don't want red. Actually, it's better if it's violet because then you can easily get to red, a more kind of lighter, more orangey red very easily. But this helps you to get a little bit darker and a little bit closer towards purple if you want to. As far as the earth tones, so people oftentimes say that you can get any color that you want just by mixing the primaries. And theoretically that's true, but we have to remember that we're mixing pigments, we're not mixing light. So a lot of times it has as much to do with whether these pigments go together as it does whether the actual colors themselves would mix together. And so I feel like these primary colors mix together very well. They actually create really, really colorful, nice black, nice black and a nice gray. But one limitation is that it doesn't seem like they make really good browns. I did a painting using just those three primary colors. I'll show you that really quick here. So for this particular painting, I didn't need anything else because as you can see, it's very overcast, so there's a lot of gray in here. But I noticed just as I was mixing, it was actually kind of hard to get a nice brown. They seemed very washed out, and it was just tough to get a really robust, good brown. And as I continued to use the palette, I saw in other projects, especially ones with a lot of green and kind of really strong nature scenes, it just seemed like it was hard to get really nice browns. So I decided to go ahead and add burnt sienna, and I found that when you add burnt sienna, it just helps a lot in being able to get those nice, rich, colorful browns. So I found that to be very helpful. And so if you just wanted to use white and then those four colors, that's a nice limited palette. I feel like you could probably mix pretty much anything that you wanted with those four colors. And the good thing about having at least one earth tone is I just feel like it helps you to make nice organic nature scenes. So whenever I'm doing grass or shrubbery, trees, anything with that's natural, anything that's organic, I feel like it's nice to have a little bit of earth tone in there. So I feel like the yellow ochre is more optional. You don't have to have yellow ochre. I go ahead and use it just because I feel like it's a nice pigment. It's a very ancient pigment. It has a lot of good characteristics. It's very stable. And you can make some very nice greens and yellows when you have Prussian blue and the yellow ochre. It tones it down a little bit. It just makes it so that it's just easier to get more organic looking colors for nature scenes especially. So I kind of like it just because it's not quite as bright as the cadmium yellow light, but you wouldn't have to have it. As long as you've got one earth tone, I think you can get all the browns that you need and get all the organic colors. So that's a little bit more optional, but I kind of like to have it, and I feel like with this palette right here, you can mix pretty much anything that you would ever need, any color that you would ever need. The only time you might consider adding another pigment would be if you've got pigments that have certain characteristics that these don't. For example, Indian yellow is a yellow that is transparent, and cadmium yellow light is very opaque. So if you want a transparent yellow, say for glazes or something like that, then you'd want to get some other colors with other characteristics. But just as far as mixing colors, I feel like you can get pretty much anything that you want with this palette. And as you can see, it makes a really nice gray here. It's a very colorful gray. I feel like this black is much better than any black that you would get from the tube. It's much more natural, and it tends to go a little bit towards blue because Prussian blue is a very strong color. So if you try this, then just make sure that you mix in enough yellow and enough red so that the purple, or I'm sorry, the blue doesn't completely take over the mixture. One last thing that I wanted to talk about is just why is this beneficial? Well, one way that it's beneficial is that mixing black is actually the best way to get you close to the right shadow mixture. Oftentimes, I think because of the Impressionists and because they didn't use black, and that's become a really strong tradition, people oftentimes, in order to mix shadow mixtures, to mix colors for the shadow side of objects, oftentimes they like to put in the complement of the color and light. For example, if it's a lemon, they'll use purple as the shadow portion. And I think that works okay just because complementary colors look nice together, so it works all right. But if you're really trying to make it look realistic, if you're trying to make it look like it actually does in nature, if you think about it, it doesn't actually become more purple in the shadows. If you really look close, what a lemon does is it actually becomes a little bit more green. And so if you're actually using black, it'll do that. It'll do that a lot more easily. Now, not all yellows would do that. It depends on what type of yellow it is. If it's a yellow that tends to go more towards orange in the light, then it becomes even more orange in the shadows. And if it's a yellow that is a little bit more of a greenish yellow, then it's going to become even more green in the shadows. But I find that this helps to be able to have more realistic shadow colors. And a lot of times shadows tend to be a little bit purple, but it needs to be a really subdued purple. You wouldn't want it to be a really strong, almost kind of garish sort of purple that a lot of people have in those shadows. It needs to be really, really toned down so that it's almost barely noticeable that it's purple. Or it really depends on the time of day. If it's a low light situation like sunset or sunrise, then the shadows tend to be more blue. During the middle of the day, they tend to be more purple, sometimes maybe even a little bit almost kind of brown because there's so much light during the middle of the day that it's even the shadows are going to be warm. Oftentimes people talk about something that I found very confusing for a long time. They say that you have warm lights and cool shadows, or cool lights and warm shadows. And I was always very confused by that. And so maybe that would be another thing that I would like to mention with that. So I think a better way of describing it is not that you would have cool lights and warm shadows. What it would be is that cool would be really bright, so almost pure white. And so if you have, say, the middle of summer, 12 noon, an extremely bright sunny day, then you would have an extremely, you'd use a lot of white. It'd be very, very bright in the light areas. And I think the best way to think about it is that there's so much light being reflected that even the shadows are warm. So that's when people talk about cool lights and warm shadows, but it's not really that the lights are cool. It's more that that everything is just so bright that even the shadows are warm. Whereas if you have a more low light situation where, say, it's towards the end of the day, right around sunset, then you would have very orange light. And it's low light, or indoors. Indoors, it's very yellow, yellow-orange light, just from a standard light bulb. So in those situations, then you have more of a bluish purple, kind of a purplish blue shadow. And in that case, you have very warm lights and cool shadows. And in that situation, since there's less light available, the shadows are not warm. The shadows are cool. So I don't know if that helps, but that helped me in understanding it a little bit better, to think about it in that way. All right, final thing I'd like to mention, another color that maybe you could consider, that I've used occasionally. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. That's burnt umber. You can use burnt umber. Sometimes it's a little bit helpful, but I usually don't, unless there's something in the scene that kind of, for whatever reason, makes me think that I could benefit from using burnt umber. But usually I don't, because there's some characteristics of burnt umber that I don't really like. It actually has roughly the same pigment as burnt sienna, but burnt sienna seems like it's a little bit more stable. So if you use burnt umber with a lot of paint thinner, oftentimes it will dry much lighter. They call that sinking. If John Singer Sargent has a few paintings where he painted burnt umber over the top of white, and burnt umber dries much faster than white, and he actually, in a way, kind of ruined the painting. It's a lot of cracking and so on. So I don't know. I just don't really love the characteristics of burnt umber. I don't know that you really need it. I kind of feel like with burnt sienna, all you really need is one brown. You kind of need one earth tone. If it's a little too red for you, you can add some yellow and some blue to it. I kind of feel like you can get about as dark as you need with it. So I just don't really usually find it necessary to have burnt umber. But if you decide to use it, just some suggestions, things that have helped me in using it is, I don't really like to use it for underpainting. It's actually traditional to do that. A lot of artists have done that in the past, but I don't really love to use it for that myself, and I don't really ever use paint thinner with it. If I use it full-bodied, and I usually mix it with other colors. So I would use my primaries to mix my color, and then I might just add just a tiny touch of burnt umber to kind of change the mixture, make it seem a little more organic, a little more brown, and so on. And I think if you use it in that way, if you mix it in with other colors, that helps with the drying time, and it helps with the sinking problem and so on. So if you're going to use it, those would just be some suggestions. Oh, and one last thing as well. There are also a few other colors that have characteristics that you can't really get anywhere else. An example of that would be phthalo green. So I would strongly suggest that you never use phthalo green for any kind of organic green, such as grass or shrubbery or anything like that. It's just such a strong green, it's almost impossible to tone it down. But it is sometimes helpful for city scenes. Say the inside of a light, when you have like a red light and it turns green and so on. That green is phthalo green, basically. So inorganic scenes like city scenes, sometimes some of those colors can be helpful. Phthalo blue, phthalo green, and so on. But I don't think those should be a regular part of your palette, because if so, they're just so strong that it's really hard to tone them down, and so they take over nature scenes. So anyway, I hope this has given you some ideas, and you can find something that will be helpful for you in choosing colors for your own palette. Thanks. Have a good day.